I don't know. Is this on? Yeah? Okay. So thank you everyone for coming. We are super excited to have Dr. McCulley here with us today. So just a little bit of background. She's going to tell us all about herself, but just a little bit of background. She got her bachelor's in biomedical engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology. She then got her PhD in bioengineering from Rice University, and now she's the regional business development manager at Nexalum. And that's all I'm going to say because she'll tell us the rest.
All right, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my background and how I got to where I am today, and then also offering some tips to help you get to where you hope to be in a career as well. So I am excited because I was in your shoes about 7-8 years ago. I was in grad school at Rice. Unfortunately, I don't have the classic picture of the white lab coat with my pipette in front of the hood. I was in an optics lab, but I, loved being in grad school, but wanted to do something in industry, and I always knew that was my focus. When I was in grad school, I had a little bit of a hard time trying to figure out how do I get into industry, what are the different positions, what am I interested in. There weren't a lot of resources available for me at the time. So now I'm always very happy to talk to current students and share my experience, and that's why I'm happy to be here today. I think it's fantastic that you guys have this as a resource to be able to learn about different opportunities, different career paths, and think about how can you help make that happen for yourself in the future. So I'll start off with some of my background, and I want to kind of use this as a case study for you, just to give you some information about how did I get to where I am, what are the different institutions I was at, what are the different companies I've worked for, what experiences in these places prepared me for the next step. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about how I have been involved in the hiring process. On the employer side, what I've seen and when I'm screening candidates, what do I look for? And then that hopefully will help you see what are employers and industry looking for, how can you use your skill sets that you've developed as a PhD to be able to appeal to an industry employer. I'm also going to talk a little bit about how you can evaluate an opportunity. What should you be looking for in a company? I know when I was in grad school and looking for the job, I kind of thought, wherever will take me, I'll be so glad to get a job. But you really want to think about, is this company the right fit for you? Not just do they want me, but do you want to work for them too? So I'll have some questions that you can ask employers so that you really better understand what the company is like and what you're getting yourself into. Okay, so I started out with a Bachelor's of Science in Biomedical Engineering from Georgia Tech. From early on, I really knew that I liked this career path in general. I have kind of the mindset of an engineer, problem solver. I really loved the idea of medical technology. I found, that in high school, whenever I was reading like Newsweek or Time magazine, I was always really drawn to the stories about new technology. I remember reading about bioinformatics and the artificial heart. So that's really how I got into this field to begin with. While I was at Georgia Tech, I participated in undergraduate research. I had worked in a couple different labs there and got a chance to understand, lab techniques and research projects and, kind of get my feet wet in the lab, which I think eventually obviously helped me to get into graduate school. I loved the biomedical engineering field, but I actually also got a minor in psychology when I was at Georgia Tech. I've always been very interested in kind of the interaction between people, what makes people tick, some of the different things that make people do what they do, buy what they buy. And I think this also kind of ties into my future interest in being on the sales side, and that communication skills and how you can influence other people all ties in with that too. While I was at Georgia Tech, I also was a tutor, one-on-one tutor for the SAT for Kaplan. And this is something that really, I think, also improved my communication skills. Working one-on-one, you're trying to teach somebody a concept that they don't quite understand yet. So you learn how to describe something in multiple different ways. You say it probably 5 different ways until you really know that they're understanding it. You learn to check for understanding and make sure that your message is getting across. So this is something that I had the opportunity to do, and I love seeing that now also on a resume, someone that has had some sort of tutoring experience or something like that, because I think it is really honing that teaching skill. I also was involved in a lot of extracurricular opportunities and leadership roles while I was at Georgia Tech. One of the experiences, though, that made me think about what I wanted ultimately in a career was a summer internship that I did at a nonprofit organization called Hands On Atlanta. This was really my first kind of office job. I had an office that I went into every day, and people that I worked with every day, and the company, or really the nonprofit organization, they were organizing volunteer projects for an international service day. And so part of what I did was to figure out and coordinate all of these different events and activities, decide, how many volunteers do we need to do this project at this different place. And my favorite days during that internship were the days that I got to leave the office and go out and visit on site and see what was happening, see these different places that we're going to send volunteers, designing the projects and what was going to happen. And so really what I learned from that is that I don't want to sit in an office all day, every day. I want to be out. I want to be doing things. And just that feeling of traveling and working with different people, that was really exciting to me. Okay, so I moved on to graduate school at Rice and earned my PhD in bioengineering. I was in Dr. Rebecca Richards-Cordum's lab, which was a fantastic experience. She was a great mentor. My research project was on looking at optical imaging agents for early detection of oral cancer. I actually had an HHMI Med-Integrad Fellowship, which meant that I had kind of a joint program between Rice and MD Anderson. I actually took GSBS classes, and I think one of them was in this room. This looks very familiar to me. And what I loved about that is it really had that clinical application. I spent time doing rotations in surgical oncology, radiation oncology, medical oncology. I did a gross anatomy lab. So it was really, a fellowship that was designed to take research and encourage students to make their research very translational. And as an engineer and with my personality, I always really loved the application of science to be able to help people. That also was part of what I wanted to do ultimately. I knew going into grad school that I didn't necessarily want to stay in academia. I really liked applying these principles in more of an industry position, and that was my goal even when I was going into grad school. I had the opportunity to continue to work a few hours a week as a personal tutor and continue to hone those sort of skills. And then one of the great things at Rice is that when I was there, the bioengineering program required students to get an internship of some sort of outside experience. It could be working in industry, it could be traveling internationally and working in a different lab. I had a friend who worked at the Public Policy Institute at Rice, but the requirement by Rice to go out and get some sort of outside opportunity was really fantastic because then your advisor has to let you go and you really get another experience to see what else is out there. So I did my internship at Carestream Molecular Imaging, which is part of Carestream Health. And I'll tell you how I got this opportunity. Because, like I said, there weren't a lot of industry connections at Rice at the time, and there wasn't a lot of support around that. But I knew I wanted to go into industry, and I really thought having an internship was a great way to kind of get a leg up and get some industry experience. So when I was in grad school, I went to as many conferences as my PI would let me go to. I love to travel. I went to Japan, I went to Germany, I went to Montreal, to Denver, all over the US. And it turned out that at one of these conferences where I had an oral presentation, it was the World Molecular Imaging Congress. And I spent time at the poster session. I talked to a lot of people. I spent time at the exhibit hall and talked to a lot of vendors. And ultimately, I actually met someone while I was walking back from the conference center back to my hotel and started up a conversation with him, talked for a while, and then then he said, well, it's great to talk with you, but I have to go. I'm going to a dinner tonight with our company. And he said, it's very corporate. It's not going to be any fun, but do you want to come? And I said, yes, absolutely. And so from there, I met the director of R&D from the company. He was really interested to hear more about my research and what I thought about different things. And it led to a good enough relationship where I could ask him about doing an internship potentially. And he was excited to have me come. I spent a summer with them. My project was still using the research skills. I read a lot of papers, I studied the literature, and was looking for kind of cataloging what are the different molecular imaging agents that people are using. That could be, optical imaging agents, different fluorophores targeted for certain things, looking at PET, SPECT, or CT, some of these different modalities, and who's doing the research, and what are they doing, what are their targets, and so on. The company itself is from the former Kodak, and they have a lot of optical molecular imaging agents. They also have a system for small animal imaging with mice, where they look at fluorescence as well as provide x-rays for anatomical information. They were looking into getting into more of a multimodality imaging system, and so the outcome that I provided was really helpful and interesting for a lot of different departments. The sales department was thrilled to have a list of papers and PIs who were doing this type of research. The marketing department really liked the idea of organizing all the different information and what people are doing and what's important to them. And then, the R&D department could kind of see where are their gaps, where is the focus of the research overall. And then for product development, it also leads into that. That's also where I actually met the first field application scientists that I knew. Since Carestream sold imaging systems for small animals, they had FASs who went around and demoed instruments, did presentations, talked to customers. And so I remember the application scientist that I met, he was only in the office maybe once every 2 weeks or so, because he was always out and visiting customers and doing different things. And I got an opportunity to talk with him and learn a lot more about what he did day to day. And that's how I kind of identified this role as something that was really exciting to me and something that I wanted to do after grad school. So I graduated in 2011, and my first job was with Point Care Technologies. This job opportunity came from a personal connection with a former grad student who was in the same lab that I was in. It took me probably 2-3 months to find the job after I graduated, and I had made the decision that I wanted to go directly into industry, and I didn't look for a postdoc position or continue to work in the lab that I did my graduate work in, because I really wanted to make sure I focused on getting into industry. I worked there as a product support specialist. The company had a really fascinating technology that was designed for looking at monitoring patients with HIV in developing countries. So the system itself was a hematology analyzer that also could measure CD4 count and percent, and would very rapidly take a blood sample, 8 minutes later report out full differential as well as CD4 count and percent. And so that way it was designed that the clinic could make a decision about starting or changing treatment for these patients. So I loved the technology. It was really exciting to me. And unfortunately, ultimately, it turned out that the company itself, from a business side, was not as well organized and not really prepared for the market. So I realized that probably as a long-term opportunity, it wouldn't be a good fit. It was great, though, because I got industry experience. I had a much better understanding of how to talk to people about what jobs were out there, what industry was looking for, and go on to the next step from there. So that's how the path I took me to Nexlom. I'm currently working at Nexlom Bioscience. I am both the field application specialist and a regional business development manager. I found the job online and I applied. I think one thing that kind of set me apart, or maybe helped my application, was that after I applied, I also used LinkedIn to see, did I know anybody who could connect me with this company. The company itself is based just outside of Boston, and they were looking for someone who is based in Houston to be their field application scientist and support the customers here. So I thought, great, that will be a great opportunity. I can be here in Houston, but again, everybody else is mostly up in Boston. So how can I, have another connection or use that? I actually found out that someone I had worked with previously knew the marketing person at Nexlom, so I asked him to pass on my resume to her, and if she could pass it on to the hiring manager. A little bit roundabout, but it worked. I think it got my resume a second look, and I was able to ultimately, get an interview and the position. So now, as the application scientist, I think of it as sales and science, as a very quick way to think about what do I do day to day. Ultimately, for a company to be successful, we do need to have the sales to back it up. That allows us to have the resources we need to continue to support our customers, and also continue to develop new products to help our customers do better science. But it also really gives me the opportunity to learn more about science in general, work with people in different fields, and work at a very technical level. I definitely did not want to get into a used car salesman type feeling with a company, but I found that Nexlom is very scientifically focused, and that's how they approach the sales process, which to me is a really good fit and I'm very comfortable with. Because Nexlom is a growing company, that has provided me career growth within the company. When I first saw the opportunity in the position, I saw that they were looking for an application scientist in Houston. And I kind of thought, this is fantastic. It's where I want to be. It's the position that I want. It's a company that does imaging and image analysis and image cytometry. So it's a really great fit for my background from grad school and my previous position where I was looking at flow cytometry. But I'll get some contacts, I'll get to know people, but probably career-wise, since the company is based in Boston, if I don't want to move there, there may not be more opportunity for me down the line. But luckily, what I found in practice is that because the company is growing, there's been opportunity for my role to expand and for me to do more things. And that has led me to be able to be the regional business development manager and lead a team. We talk about strategy together. We work together very closely, and I really enjoy that aspect of it. So as a field application scientist for Nexalon, we have a lot of different products that I work with scientists and sell to labs. Anything from very simple cell count and viability systems that automate the hemocytometer up into fluorescent systems that will quantify intensity so that you can do image cytometry. And then even some plate-based systems for high throughput screening. So there's a big range of what we offer. That means that every day is different. Every customer I talk to has a different focus, and I have to think about how can we help them do better science? What does our product offer that helps, make their day easier or gives them better results? I obviously am based here in Houston. The dark green area is the area that I cover directly. So you can imagine there's a lot of travel involved. For me, with the Texas Medical Center here, at least half of my customers are here in the medical center, so it's a great place to be based. I don't have to travel every week, but I would say on average I probably take a round trip flight about 3 times a month. Sometimes that's for a day trip up to Dallas and back. Sometimes it's 3 days out in Colorado. It can vary. But, I really try to make sure that I'm here to support the customers when they need me. I'm very responsive. And, to me, that's kind of the most important thing as part of being an ambassador for Nexalon is to make sure my customers are very happy and that I'm giving them great service. So what does that also mean, day-to-day practical sort of things? My car is always full of equipment. My house is full of literature and equipment and everything else. I go to vendor shows and trade shows and national conferences, do presentations, and work with other people in the field in other areas. I do a lot of troubleshooting for customers. So I have lots of pictures on my phone about this machine with this message, or how can I better analyze this cell type, and so on. But I get to see some beautiful places. I get to travel a lot, which is fun. This is out in Colorado. And then this is in Puerto Rico, which I also cover and was not on the map. That's my kind of secret bonus, which is great. We do have several customers in Puerto Rico, and this is actually the view out of the lab at the Neurobiology Institute. And you can see, obviously, the ocean, and the faraway area is El Morro, the old Spanish fort. So it's right there on a historic site. I don't know how they get work done, but it's amazing to visit these different places and travel around and work with different customers. One of the things that was really exciting for me is that I was able to set up a collaboration project with Dr. Dean Lee's lab here at MD Anderson. Unfortunately, he's since moved on to another institution, but I got to help develop a new application for one of our pieces of equipment to be able to look at NK cell killing using our instrument. Their previous method was using a plate reader. We provided a more direct assay where you could actually image the cells and track them over time and get very similar results. Actually, it was even a more sensitive method for detecting NK cell killing. So, like I said, there's the sales aspect, but then there's also the scientific aspect, and I love that I can still get a publication. I've had a couple book chapters also talking about methods for cell counting and cell viability. So I think it's really nice that I still have the opportunity to work with scientists, remain very technical while I'm in this role in industry. And overall, the diversity of different groups that I work with, different labs, different cell types, different research projects, it keeps my job really exciting. I've used our cell counters for counting elephant PBMCs, goat sperm, yeast, all sorts of different things. The list goes on. One of the cool things is that we have systems that are designed for looking at yeast count and viability. So breweries will use our equipment as well. So the vast majority of my customers are in life sciences, but every once in a while I'll get to visit a brewery, which is always kind of a fun departure from the norm. Okay, so if this sounds interesting to you and you're interested in how can I get into this as well, I want to talk a little bit about how are PhD grads evaluated for industry roles. You know, what do I look for? So obviously I'm not an HR person. I work for a company that's less than 100 people. So my hiring process may be different from a large company. So that's kind of my disclaimer here to tell you just at least, you know, my experience and what I look for. In terms of screening resumes, I've looked at nearly 1,000 resumes in the 5 years that I've been at Nexelon. I have talked to over 100 people on the phone to do phone interviews and phone screens. I've probably met over 30 people for in-person interviews or presentations to our company. And I have chosen 4 people for direct hires in my time at the company. And then I've also, you know, as the direct hiring manager, and then I've also given feedback on about 12 other positions within our company where someone else was the direct hiring manager, but I helped with the evaluation process. So, like I said, this is my experience and my opinion, but hopefully it is helpful for you. So, from the very first step in your first contact, let's say you find a job on LinkedIn or posted from the company's website, I would really, really encourage you to do your research on that company. You can find out a lot of information about a company from LinkedIn, from their own website, just Googling them. It's really important that you know more than just seeing something that looks appealing and you apply right away. And the reason for that is that your resume really, you want it to fit the job description. In the job description, they'll typically say what are they looking for very clearly. You know, what is the required experience? What's the required degree? You know, what other experience do they want? What are they looking for? So write your resume accordingly. I remember from a career talk that I went to at one of the AACR conferences when I was in grad school, they said, search widely, but apply selectively. So look everywhere, but that doesn't mean you want to send out 100 resumes. That's probably not the best use of your time. Look instead at that company's job description, find out more about that company. Is that a place you want to work? And make sure your resume really highlights the things that they're looking for. For me, when I look at a resume, if I have a specific job description that I'm hiring for, I'm kind of looking for some yes-no sort of things. You know, do they have a PhD in the relevant field? Are they currently living in the area and have knowledge of the accounts where I want to hire somebody? You know, they're very much yes-no things. So in the job description, if they have very clear criteria, make sure that people can easily find that on your resume. With a cover letter, that can be a great way to show that you've done your research. It can really catch somebody's attention. The trick here is you really want to write with the reader in mind. For you to just say, let me tell you about myself, that may not really be taking the next step. Instead, if you can look at the job description and figure out what are they hoping for you to be able to accomplish by hiring somebody in this position. Maybe maybe it's sales and they need somebody who can really be out there and talk to people and spread the word. If you can write something that will grab attention, you do that by showing that you understand what they're looking for. I had somebody who sent me an email with their resume, and they said, from looking at your website, I can see that they saw, the systems that we had for counting cells. And she said, as a scientist who spent 30 minutes a day counting cells, I really see the value in your products, and I would be so excited to share that with other scientists. And that was something that was totally different from the norm. That really caught my attention because I thought, she gets it. She knows that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help people. We're trying to save them time. She understands the value of it already. I had someone else who sent me an email that said, you're looking for a person that has this, and this skills. I am that person. And let me tell you why. Let me tell you a story why. And that was also something different and unique that really caught my attention. So think about what are people looking for when they're hiring for this position, and write a cover letter or an email in a way that shows that you understand that. Here's one interaction that I got through LinkedIn, and this is just an example of maybe what not to do. When I see this is all I see. My name is misspelled, and the position is misspelled. And it can seem so incredibly obvious that, of course, you should never do this. And maybe they're just very excited that I accepted their position. They're writing it from their phone. But take a minute and think about putting your best self forward and making sure that you display yourself in a way that you want to be seen. Every time I have an interaction with a candidate, I think, this is how they're going to interact with my customers. This is how they're going to treat them. Did they take the time to make sure the person's name is spelled correctly? People love their own name. You have to be careful about that. So just that attention to detail that's needed, in science, this misses the mark. Okay, so let's say you get a phone interview and you're on to the next step. I'll tell you some of the questions that I typically ask candidates. I usually will ask them, for a summary about themselves, and that's a good introduction to kind of give me an idea of where they are and what they're looking for. Then I also usually ask, pick one of your favorite research projects or something that gave you maybe an unexpected result. Tell me a little bit about that research project. What was the goal starting out? How did you go about it? What did you find? And what was the outcome? Here's my secret when I ask this. I'm not actually asking about what pathway you looked at or the exact research project. I want to hear, do I want to listen to you talk about your research? It's really about, can you tell an engaging story? Can you start in a way that makes me really interested in hearing what happened? I had someone recently tell me a story about his research, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I won't remember the details, obviously, but he was looking at a project where he had breast cancer cells, and he wanted to look at the interaction and the influence of other cell types that were in that microenvironment. And so he had labeled the breast cancer cells with a red fluorophore in the membrane. He labeled the fibroblasts with a green fluorophore in the membrane, and he combined them and looked at different conditions to see what the effects were. He ultimately did flow cytometry, and he was trying to separate out the populations. And he said, I kept getting a single population, like they were both expressing both colors. He was like, it made no sense. And so I'm already hooked. I'm like, that makes no sense. How could that be? I'm already like hypothesizing in my head, like, what happened? Did he stain it a certain way, not right, and didn't wash it enough? And he said, okay, so I went to the confocal to see what is happening. And so I was imaging the cells, and what I saw is that there were long protrusions from one cell that connected with another cell, and the fluorophores were swapping. They were swapping membrane proteins and membrane components. So, he's telling me the story, and I'm like, what? This is crazy. But this is the kind of story that is fantastic for him to tell, because he is engaging in a way that makes me want to know what happened next. He's showing that he has done flow cytometry and imaging, which I was looking for in my job description. He's also showing that he's very passionate about what he's doing. He's able to really just tell that story. So when someone asks you to tell them about your research, the exact technical details or the level of detail maybe doesn't need to be as much as what you're used to in science. But the goal is for you to tell an exciting, engaging story to someone who may not be an expert in your field. And again, that's because you're taking that skill about, people want to listen to you. You're going to be explaining complex information to customers and engaging them. So this is demonstrating that skill. I usually ask a lot about, do you have experience teaching or tutoring? And often PhDs do. So think about, what is your teaching style? What is your approach? And how can this fit into what people are looking for your future interaction with customers? I ask people why they're interested in the position and what attracted them initially. And really here, I want to make sure that they know what they're getting into. They know what they want. They're committed to something like this. Because I find that a lot of people maybe don't know enough yet, and I don't know if it's going to be the right fit for them, but I want them to be able to show that they've done some research, they've done some homework, and they know what the position entails. I ask too, sometimes if they've had experience using our equipment before, and this is, if you haven't, that doesn't rule you out at all, but it is an opportunity for you to say, no, I wasn't aware that it was out there, but I looked at the website and I can really see the value. I really wish I had this when I was in grad school because I would have used it for this, this, and this. And again, you're being able to take information, you've done your homework, and then you're showing that you can talk about the value of what we offer to a potential new person. So it's really all about telling a story, and that's something that I think is important for engaging communication always. So that engaging storyteller, a very interactive communication style where it's easy to talk back and forth. Really want to make sure that you know what you want and what you're getting into with the position, and that you really can understand what value we provide. And the interviewee probably doesn't know every buzzword or every value proposition or exactly what the instruments do just from the website, but even an attempt at this is really good and very helpful. You may not understand everything perfectly, but it's also your opportunity to take what you do understand and ask more questions to show you care about this aspect. Okay, so into an in-person interview or a presentation. Again, that communication style is something I'm always looking for because it's so critical in this role. It's also really important to be able to explain complex topics clearly. I think we've all been to scientific presentations where we understand the first 3 slides and then get lost and we think, well, maybe I'm not an expert, maybe I'm not supposed to understand this, or maybe if I really pay attention I can follow everything, but it's a challenge. And no one really likes that to happen to them. People want to understand and they want to go along with you. So somebody who can take a complex topic and really clearly explain it, I think it's so valuable in this position and for a lot of other skills in life. One of the things that our president always does in these presentations, he will ask a lot of questions. And he really wants just to make sure that the candidate can answer questions and kind of hold their ground and not get too flustered. You know, a lot of times you'll have customers like that. You'll have situations where people maybe are challenging you on a topic or asking for a lot of detail. You know, this can get to the idea of, you know your science well and you're confident in what you're saying. It also gives an opportunity that if you don't understand something or you don't know something, you know, you can admit that. So I think that's something that's important also. And ultimately, you know, I'm always evaluating someone to be able to really fit the company dynamic, the team dynamic, depending on the role. And that's something that may be hard for you to prepare for, but I think it's something that, you know, you can try to read people and understand what's important to everybody that you're interviewing with and make sure you can demonstrate that. So how can you prepare for this interview and have these types of responses? One thing that I think is really useful is just preparing multiple stories about your experience, something that you did that was out of the ordinary, a research project that was really interesting or unique, or you took a different perspective. A lot of times, different stories and situations can be adapted for different questions. You know, someone may ask you about your greatest strength, or they might ask you about your research project in particular. But think about all the different ways that you can adapt the same story for different questions. That's a lot easier than having a list of 50 potential interview questions and thinking about each of these. Make sure you research the company, the products, and even your interviewer. You know, what is their background? What do they care about? What are they looking for? That way you can really make sure that what you say resonates with them. I would also recommend that you're ready to ask about next steps. You know, depending on wherever you are in the process, I think it's very easy for a phone conversation to kind of end quickly and you don't really know what's going to happen next. Do you know if you're going to be passed on to another step? Will someone else contact you? I think if you are kind of mentally prepared that you definitely want to ask about these next steps, then you'll know what to expect. You'll know what's coming. So for example, that may be, you know, when you're getting to the close of the conversation, find out, you know, do you feel comfortable passing me on to the next stage of the interview process? You know, is there someone else that I should talk to about this position? You know, don't be afraid to ask a direct question. In general, I love it when candidates ask me questions. So definitely don't be afraid to ask questions, even on an initial phone screen or interview. You want to build your questions from your understanding of the job based on the research you've done and the job description. So for example, you don't want to ask me, oh, so what states are covered by this position? That's listed on the job description. Instead, you could say, I see that this position covers about 8 states. You know, that can be a big territory to cover. What's your strategy for making sure that you take care of all of your customers and are where you need to be? That's a much better type of question. It's really good to ask those open-ended questions and ask for opinions. People always like to share their opinion. It's you know, just general psychology. But asking open-ended questions and really probing for more details, that's also a skill that I have to use every day when I talk to customers. So it's good for you to do those things in an interview because then I see they're willing to continue to push and ask questions until they really understand something. It's important that you have a good understanding of both the day-to-day and the big picture. What's the motivation behind why they're hiring for this role? What's your day-to-day routine really going to be like? I've had times where I get off the phone with somebody and they say, oh, I'm very excited about this. I think I will be a perfect fit for this role. And I think they don't have a clue what this really involves. They didn't ask me anything about like what I do day to day. Maybe they already know because they have a friend who's in this type of position. If that's the case, talk about that in the interview. Talk about what you already know about this type of position. But if I'm concerned that you don't have a clue about what you're getting into and you didn't ask those questions, then I'm not going to be as likely to recommend you for a next step. One of the other things, about asking good questions, a lot of times people will ask, oh, does your company provide training? Yes, of course. Maybe a better question that's an open-ended question is something like, what kind of training does your company provide, and at what stage are people independent in this role? That gives you the feeling that you want to be independent, you want to become independent, there will be a learning process, and you want to understand what the company is going to provide to help you get there. Okay, so what are some of the other transferable skills? We've mentioned different things for PhDs. I love to see any sort of teaching, tutoring, mentoring experiences. That translates very well into this role where we're training and supporting new scientists with new equipment. Something else that might be a great story to tell is talking about initiating a collaboration. One of the candidates that I hired for a job in North Carolina, he was working on a specific project that was not really an area of expertise in his lab currently. And so he had to go out and he actually created this kind of collaboration network with people from all over the world. And he initiated that. He started this because he wanted to do this with his project and take it in that direction. That type of story really demonstrates his ability to network, to research people, to know what people want to do, and then be able to convince those people to work with him. That's great. Something else, I had a candidate tell me that he's the person in the lab that people come to when an instrument breaks, or that when their experiment doesn't work, they ask him, what should I do? So troubleshooting in general, that's something I do all the time, working with customers. It shows that creativity and critical thinking skills that you develop in your PhD program. So again, these are great skills. Create stories that go with them so that you can demonstrate these skills. Some other experiences, if you have sales or customer service experience in an unrelated field, that's still good. We had someone who used to sell cell phones, and someone else who worked in a customer service call center. These are actually great experiences. You learn how to interact with customers or sell different things. You're goal-oriented and driven. Leadership roles are also great for showing those interpersonal skills and your desire to step beyond what's required in the bare minimum. Anytime you can take initiative to learn from some sort of outside opportunity. Maybe you love to read business books. Talk about these things. These are unique things that set you aside. It shows that you have the initiative and the drive and you really want to learn and be successful. And sometimes, if you want to have maybe one line in your resume about personal hobbies, maybe you're a runner, or you love to cook, or you have this other outside experience that you're really passionate about. Sometimes it might not resonate at all with the person who reads the resume, but sometimes it might. So to me, it doesn't hurt to include something like that. One other thing that I think it can be really valuable as you're preparing for your job search and trying to understand what's out there is to do informational interviews. You can contact people through LinkedIn. You can think about, who do I know that is a vendor that comes into my lab and interacts with us? Contact these people, and it's a really low-pressure way to just understand what do they do day to day and see, is it something you want to do? It can help you understand a position or a company, and it's a great way to network. Someone else that I hired recently in another area didn't live in that area at the time, which normally I wouldn't necessarily consider because I really want to have someone who's already based in my area and understands the accounts. But he had already decided that he wanted to move to that area. He had done probably 20 informational interviews with all of the people at different companies in that area. And so he had a huge network of people already too. Something else that I would recommend is if you do send people messages on LinkedIn, it's fantastic if you can be very specific about what you're looking to get out of it, or use some sort of connection that you have to establish that. And then again, it can also prepare you for job interviews because you start to see what's important to these people. Okay, so let's say you have an opportunity and you've done all these things and the company really wants you. How should you evaluate that opportunity in that position? I think it's great to ask why the position is available in the first place. It helps you understand why are they hiring. Is it because they're growing or because the previous person left after 6 months and they've had a hard time keeping somebody in the area? Understand the company. What are their challenges and their strengths? What's their culture and structure like? Who are their customers? How do they train and evaluate their employees? How is the company's success evaluated? What are their goals? You'll see a huge difference between public and private companies. And you'll see a difference with companies that are rapidly growing versus ones that are kind of steady and keeping steadily along. This is a question that I asked with my current role. I asked, what characteristics help someone be successful in this role? And I asked this to the person who is my current boss. And I kind of was thinking along the lines of what personal characteristics are good. And she said, just make the sales. And that gives me so much insight into what is important to her. So ask these sort of things, even if it doesn't give you the response you expect. It's also really important that you talk to a lot of different people from that company, even if they're in different roles or the same role in a different area. Get those multiple points of view. It's really valuable. And I'm going to end with just a couple recommended resources, some of the books that I really like. The Challenger Sale is a sales book, but it really is also a great communication and persuasion book. Great by Choice or anything by Jim Collins are really, they're common business school books. A lot of people have read them, but they're great stories about what makes companies successful. And then another one I really like is Getting Things Done. It's a kind of productivity book and helps you organize your kind of day-to-day routine. I also really like themuse.com. It's somewhat superficial. It's not very specific for scientists, but I've signed up for their newsletter and they send out daily emails with just little tidbits that, are easily read and digested in 5 minutes or less that kind of are good for thinking about your career development. So I talked a little bit about my background and how that led me to where I am. And I talked about what I look for in candidates and how I evaluate them. Hopefully that will lead you to get the job you want and be successful as well. And then one thing I will share in closing is I have a lot of instruments that I always take around with me in my car, but when you do a very successful demo, sometimes you can turn that into a gift from the brewery that bought your instrument. So I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you so much, Dr. McCulley, again. And I'd also like us to thank the MD Anderson Postdoctoral Association for co-hosting this event with us. It was awesome. So we'll take questions, and if you have a question, just wait until you get the microphone before you ask it, because we are recording it.
Hi. So I have a question about how do you rate the company? So you're talking about like you say which companies seems not to be a long-term company to stay. Which one is the one that's growing, and like how do you rate them? Mm-hmm. Like where do you find the resource for for you to know like if those companies are good for you to stay longer?
Yeah, I think that type of information for figuring out, is it a good company to work for? Is it good for you? It's hard to get that information just from Googling or anything like that. From talking to a lot of different people at the company and asking questions about, what do they love about working at that company? What do they see as the company's biggest challenges? Those sort of things. You want to make sure that the message is consistent. You may pick up on red flags if people are telling you different things, or if people aren't excited and passionate about where they work. I think it can be very hard to know in advance, but it's definitely worth it to try to get a lot of different points of view and ask those types of questions to see if there are any red flags. Mm-hmm.
Great talk. Thanks for taking the time to do this. It was really insightful. I have a simple question. What's your personal opinion about not doing a postdoc, and how did that, was that a good or a bad decision for you? And in general, like within the field, are there a lot of postdocs or a lot of people who did postdocs? And do you think it's worthy to do that?
That's a great question. For me, I always knew I really wanted to be in industry, and I wanted to focus on that and not get distracted and, caught up in something else or have other obligations. So I did not do a postdoc. It worked out just fine for me. When I'm evaluating candidates, with my job description, I want someone to have the PhD because I really think it does develop those critical thinking skills and gives you an expertise in that area, and helps, kind of establish credibility when you're talking to scientists. But, I don't give any extra benefit usually to someone who has a postdoc. To me, sometimes that almost signals I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do yet, and I'm still not sure that I want to be in industry, or maybe I'll still pursue academia. To me, I view those candidates pretty equally, unless they have, some really unique or fantastic experience as a postdoc. Mm-hmm.
If I could highlight before the next question. It was a great, great talk. Thank you so much. Also a great question. It's a very important question. Regularly, grad students particularly ask, should I do a postdoc if I want to end up there? A great message I had from your background was you highlighting the importance of doing extracurricular activities because of leadership skills, volunteer work because of communication skills, showing that you're independent, getting your fellowship, the importance of internship. You did a couple of internships. Mm-hmm. Also, the importance of networking. So all these evidences, if you don't have these, of course, you need to extend your grad school to do a postdoc, to collect all these evidences, to be competent, for example, in such career path. Mm-hmm. But if in advance you identify what you want to be in your next career chapter, like Dr. McCulley, you can be successful in your applications immediately after grad school without you needing to buy yourself some time doing a postdoc. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So in applying for jobs, I've come across a lot of job descriptions that don't necessarily specify whether they require a resume or a CV. And coming from a PhD, you will have both. So is there a better one to use for specific jobs? I mean, I know academia is probably CV, but in terms of industry, would you prefer to use a CV or a resume?
For me, a resume I would prefer. Anything longer than 2 pages is too long. Like I said, when I am screening resumes, I'm kind of looking to check off certain things. Do they have the PhD? Are they, in the right field? Do they have experience with microscopy? You don't need that many pages to do it. And if someone has 3 publications or 6, I don't care. I know it's terrible to say in an academic institution, but in industry, it's not as critical to me unless there's some amazing story that I should know about why you have that many. But I think the PhD in itself establishes a lot of that credibility. I'll talk to you about your research. I want to make sure, it makes sense and you have a logical explanation for what you're doing. But, a very detailed CV that lists every presentation, every publication is probably more than what's really needed.
So I have a question. So your PhD in this kind of position that's the crux between sales and science, like you said, other than FAS in the industry structure, is there any other type of position that a PhD lends itself really well to, or people who are PhDs really thrive in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would first look to kind of internally within my company to give some examples. With our company, we have a pretty active R&D group who also manages a lot of the collaborations. And one of the members from our R&D group was also involved in my collaboration, kind of designing some of the experiments and so on. R&D in our company also works very closely with marketing because we approach sales and marketing from a very scientific and technical perspective. So that sort of role may be something else that, is maybe not directly in the field, but uses, the scientific skills of a PhD in some sort of R&D department. That also has an opportunity for some outside marketing type communication.
All right, well, if there are no more questions, we can thank Dr. McCulley. This was awesome.